Now, let's talk about how being underrated in hip-hop is actually a bad thing. We often talk about how our favorite artists are so underrated and they deserve more credit for everything they're doing, how come more people aren't listening to them, and so forth. Let's talk about Denzel Curry, who's of course a great example of what I'm talking about here. We all know that this is a rapper who started off as being one of those very underrated rappers. You know, the whole hip-hop is sleeping on him topic that I've talked about in the past, but now after proving himself by putting in a lot of work and living up to his fullest potential, he's not underrated anymore and he's getting a lot of credit for his work. See, the thing is, you would think that everyone going around and calling you underrated is a good thing for the artist, but it's really the complete opposite. I mean, look at any super successful rapper you could possibly think about. For the sake of making a clear point here, let's take Drake, who most people would consider highly overrated. At one point in his career, Drake was actually underrated because the amount of credit he was getting wasn't really matching the amount of talent he had. Now, that was of course in his early days, and fast forward years later after that, he became amongst one of the most relevant rappers alive, and he still is one of them, to be honest. But that's the thing with what we're talking about here. There's gonna come a time when their credit is gonna exceed or at least be up to par with the talent of the artist, and essentially that's really the place everyone wants to be in. Being in that underrated box does a couple of things to you. One of them is being content with being the underdog. One example I want to use here is King Los. Now, I think most people are familiar with him. Los is an amazing lyricist. He's very talented, and you might have actually seen his Sway in the Morning freestyle that went viral a couple years back. That's actually how most people found out about him.
I'm a galaxy, how could you challenge me? Challenges couldn't come to me. Balance is good, but you couldn't balance me.
But if you know anything about Los, then you know that he never properly took off as a rapper. His career has been stagnant for some time now, and people don't really talk about him at all. It's almost like he doesn't even exist in the hip-hop conversation. But then again, it is for a reason. Till this day, one thing I've noticed is a lot of his fans still call him underrated because he's been stuck in that box his entire career now. And keep in mind, this is someone who was once signed to Diddy, but of course he himself decided to part ways with Bad Boy, and that's another story. The point of me bringing that up is because I'm trying to make the point that King Los wasn't a struggle rapper with no connections, and considering how talented he actually is, he could have made shit happen and properly taken off as a rapper. But I'm asking myself, was he one of those rappers who just got comfortable with being underrated because he didn't see another future for himself? See, the whole underrated label can also be a bad thing because hip-hop fans simply call everyone and everything underrated. There's people out there who genuinely think that Jid is underrated just because he's not mainstream, and it seems like the standard for being in that underrated category is so easy to fall into due to the fact that if you're not getting the same amount of attention as some of the biggest rappers in the game, then automatically you are considered underrated. I honestly think this whole thing of calling your favorite rapper underrated actually hurts them more than anything, because while they themselves are grinding day in and day out to get out of that underrated box so they could get an acceptable amount of compensation for how good they actually are, we as fans, we're still classifying them as a thing they don't want to be. Because trust me when I say this, there's not a single rapper on this planet who's working towards being underrated. Everyone wants to be overrated because that means more money, more artistic freedom, because now you have the resources to do whatever the hell you want to do. And then if you're signed to a label, you have more leverage because now they're prioritizing you over the artist who is underrated. Ain't that funny? So yeah, that's what I personally have to say about this whole underrated conversation and why it's really a bad thing being underrated and being called underrated. Now I want to ask what you have to say about this topic though. What are your general thoughts regarding this entire conversation of being underrated and being called underrated as a rapper? Definitely let me know in the comment section below and let's have a discussion about this.